Hey guys, it's your girl Rachel Real, and I'm back with another video. It has been a minute. I'm back. I'm so sorry. I did a 21-day fast with one of my friends, and during the fast, I had moments of revelation, moments of like a lot of peace, and then there were some very testing, trying moments. I really just needed a second to kind of recover from that because there was a lot of spiritual warfare going on. Like the enemy was trying to get in my head. And child, I learned a lot, and I can definitely make another video about that. But this video is about my testimony and me sharing with you guys where God has brought me from. This is gonna be a long one, I already know it. Before I get into anything, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure that you like this video. Turn on your post notifications so you know when I post. I'm gonna get right into it. I have never really enjoyed long intros on YouTube. I just think they make people lose interest. Okay, so I'm from Philly, for those of you who don't know. Growing up, I lived in a house that was very overpopulated. We all just kind of shared beds. It was a very make do with what you have situation. But what I will say is that we had a lot of fun. There were hard times, but I feel like my mom did such a great job of shielding us from all the realities of like the real world, the adult world. My dad struggled with a drug addiction when I was growing up. So because of that, my mom had to be mom and dad. She was the one with us day to day, walking me here, taking me to appointments, doing this, doing that. So she did a lot and carried a lot. So a lot of times it was just me, my mom, and my two sisters. So that was my core. That's the nucleus of my whole life. Although my dad had a drug addiction, it was not very apparent. It was not easy to tell. He looked very healthy. He was very fit, and he never showed us his drug habit. And that was something that I also was grateful for. Although I knew he had an issue with drugs, I never had to see it. He also was very loving, very sensitive, definitely one of my favorite people to talk to and spend time with. His addiction stole a lot of time. God always had favor on my mom, my sisters, and I, because when I think about where we are today versus where we were, it's truly a miracle that we're all, here. None of us have a drug addiction. None of us are like in unhealthy relationship. There was a lot of generational curses that really needed to be broken. In hindsight, it felt like we were trapped. Didn't have a lot of resources. How are you gonna get out of this situation? So looking at it on paper, it's like, dang, like this is sad. You know what I'm saying? But one thing that kept us is God. And if I had to put a second thing on the list, education. My mom sewed into us so much about God and about education. Like she always made sure that we were like reading. So there were also like fond memories of us growing up too. I just remember that, it was tough for a while. Although the odds were stacked against us, it just always felt like we had so much favor. We lived at church, Bible study on Wednesdays, and we had church on Sunday. We had choir rehearsal like a different day. So we were always in church. We lived there. And through relationships in church, a lot of people offered us like rides and just kind of took us in. And we always just had a village of people. So there was always a favor on our lives. It wasn't like, oh, God just left us out to dry or something. No, I've always felt that although on paper I looked unfortunate, I always felt very fortunate. For the sake of this video not being 2 hours long, I'm gonna get to kind of the part where things took a turn. Things kind of got a little shaky. That chapter I'll call chapter 2. We moved to Upper Darby. My mom was in a new relationship, and it was like, okay, we're moving. This is gonna be great for us. I started going to a school that I was like bused to. Huge leap from where we were coming from. Okay, you made it out. You know what I'm saying? And seemingly like everything was good on the surface, but there was just things underneath the surface that weren't great. And I won't go too deep into it because it's not really my trauma to share. And I always try to respect my family when I share my testimony because it's also their story too. you know? And they should be able to choose whether they want to share. Things were good until they weren't. And that's where I'm going to kind of leave that, because like I said, it's not my trauma to tell. I just want to respect that. My mom ended up getting a divorce and we were kind of back to struggling. That summer we stayed with one of my like mom's best friends, and then the next school year, and actually all through middle school, which no one in my middle school knew, but all through middle school I did not have a home. We were staying with a woman from my church. I feel like when people see me now, they see like, oh, like the makeup, the hair, the aesthetics and all that, and they may think like, oh, like Rachel sold this or Rachel sold that, or, and it's like, I'm grateful to God that I don't look like what I've been through. But I think this is so important that people know, like, no, like I've been through a lot and you could still come out of it and be a beautiful rose, and kind of like that whole rose that grew out the concrete story, where it's like you can come from rough conditions but still come out beautiful, still come out graceful. You don't have to follow after, you know, generational patterns. And I hope that that's an inspiration to somebody. Oh, I thought you came from some money. Girl, you know how Martin be like, somebody done told you wrong. But that is kind of where I learned my fashion sense from. And I feel like that's still with me today, because I was making something out of nothing. Because you know, middle school kids, if you didn't have Abercrombie and Fitch, from your winter coat to your shirts to like your book bag, everything had to be like a brand, and like Aeropostale and all that stuff. So what my family was doing is like, we would go to like Foreman Mills, places like that, to go get uniform. But then we would go to Plato's Closet and I would get like a cute sweater. I had to learn how to make something out of nothing, essentially. And that's where I credit my like fashion sense from. And now since I do like fashion content, I feel like that's where it kind of started from. When I was about 14, we got our own house again. And this was our safe space. It was just an all-woman house, right? And it was great. So I was starting high school the next year. Jeez Louise. Y'all, just know this chapter is about to take a turn. Going into high school, and I think I'm going to backtrack for a second to get to where we are. Throughout like the 8 years before this, my dad became sober. I would go out with him, and I'm going to tell you guys right now, my dad and I were like this. Like, it was just one of those things that didn't have to be explained. From the time I was a child, he told me, I used to just sit on his lap and be like, Daddy, everything is gonna be okay. Like, don't worry. Like, everything's gonna be good. Because I just was so connected to him. Like, it felt like, you know, like we just had this special bond. No matter what happened, no matter how many times he broke promises or said I'm gonna be there and didn't come, I never lost faith in my dad. And so now skip back to around 14, like 13 or 14. The church we were at, that I had this church family from, and we just like have felt so at home at, my dad started coming to the church with us. So this was like a joyous time. Like, it just felt like, okay, we have our own place, and now my dad's back and I'm seeing him, and it felt like, okay, like the waters are calm now. It's these moments where you just have to grab onto it, because it's like, okay, everything's okay, everything's okay. And then something bad happens, and that causes you to always feel like the other shoe is gonna drop. So a lot of my anxiety that I've struggled with has been, okay, like things are good now, but like when are they gonna get bad? Because shortly after my dad came to live with us, my dad passed away from an accidental overdose after 8 years of being sober. So it was something that happened suddenly. None of us knew it was gonna happen. None of us could have predicted it, because my dad was someone who was seemingly in really good health. You know, worked out all the time. Just a very just a very, very fit guy, and the happiest guy around. Like, so funny, so kind, would do anything for anyone. Everywhere we went with my dad, he knew someone. He was just a light, and I think what's making me emotional a bit is just that we're so similar. Like, I have such a similar calling on my life that I believe my dad had. And my dad was a dreamer. He wanted to start his own trucking business. And just seeing how our paths overlap now is very beautiful and emotional. And it's been, how old am I? It's been 8 years since it happened. So I've had a lot of time to heal. I've been through a lot of therapy to deal with it. But we were just so similar, very sociable, very friendly. We both are just like dreamers, and even the way that I get dressed up to go everywhere. My dad was a person who, it didn't matter where he was going, he wanted his glasses to match the shirt, match the pants. I'm the exact same way. It don't matter if I'm going to the gym. I want to look nice. The last thing I want to say about my dad is just that my dad loved God with his whole heart, and he was never ashamed of God. So when it comes to this channel and how I talk about God on here, and it's, my dad was a person who, no matter where he was at, no matter how low he was, what neighborhood he was in, he was always talking about God. And I'm just really grateful because before my dad passed, I was able to tell him that I forgave him for all the times he couldn't show up for me growing up. And I got to tell him, like, I forgive you. I don't hold that against you. Like, I love you. And he got to tell me he was proud of me. And so I'm really grateful to God because God knew he was going to go soon. That wasn't something I was aware of. God knew. And I feel like God gave me that gift of like having that peace of mind that at least we got to sit face to face and me tell him, I do not hold any of that against you. I'm going to say that's the end of chapter 2. And the reason why I'm referring to these times in my life as different chapters is because when my dad passed, it felt like my whole life just like flipped on its head, like flipped completely upside down. So because of that, I don't really see the time that I'm in right now as the same life that I had growing up, because death just flips your whole world upside down. I can say out of everything that I've been through in my life, that like forever changed me. Kind of right after my dad passed, I went right back to school and right back to church. And that's because I was in a state of shock and I wasn't able to process that it happened because like I told you guys, it was really, really sudden. When I turned 17, that's when all of my trauma started to manifest. All those pent up, built up emotions came out, and it came out in a way of like, I never wanted to be home. I was the definition of outside. I wasn't doing anything sexually, but I was just constantly outside. And that's because in my house, everyone was mourning. So naturally, I didn't want to be there all the time because it felt sad. I have to face the reality that my dad is gone, and that's why we all are so sad. Of course, that exposed me to a couple different things. I started smoking weed around like age 15, and so at 17, I was still smoking pretty heavily and going to like just different places with different groups, different friends. I explored. I started going to visit colleges and just kind of being like around a lot of older people. And eventually I did become sexually active. And the problem was that I still had in my mind all of this abandonment, these rejection issues from my dad that I didn't realize were there. It's not a time that I carry shame from either. I think that's important to note because God will free you from the sin, but he'll also free you from the shame. So there's no reason for me to look back and be like, oh, I can't believe I was there. Like, why did I'm so stupid. No, I will talk about this just a bit because I want to hopefully help or inspire someone out there that's watching. There was a moment where I stopped trusting that God would send me like my partner, and I chose to set up like a date for myself. And I chose someone who I just was physically attracted to and thought like, okay, like this would be a good time, like blah, blah, blah. And it kind of made me feel better, like self-esteem wise, that this person was like paying attention to me. I don't know, I just had a lot of low self-esteem. Basically, this date ended up coercing me into sex, and it was very, very traumatic for me. Yeah, it was very traumatic for me. That was kind of the end of my exploration, because I think after that I just did not want to be touched. I didn't want to be bothered. One thing I want to share is that my relationship with sex was very different when I was younger than now. Because God has like purified it and shown me that it's about love and it's this union between like married people. There was just something in me that God has delivered me from, where I just felt this like yearning or this craving for male love. And for that moment, I felt love. I was more concerned about the fact that afterwards I felt nothing, because there was just like this perverted like vision of sex that was like, okay, you love me for right now, but I know you don't really love me, so I don't want any part of your fake love after we have this interaction. That's the best way I can put it. I've since gone to therapy and dealt with that. You know what? Now I can say, let's go into is this chapter 3? Chapter 3 was the end of the dark times. I can honestly say that after that experience with that date, life just went up. I had a breakthrough. Like after that, something shifted in me where I was like, God, I want to get to the root of the issue. I don't want to just keep putting myself out there in these ways that people are taking advantage of me or seeing me sexually, because that's not who I am deeply. So I just shut everything down. Let me spare my face before I get into my college days. My college days were actually pretty tame compared to my late high school days. I feel like that's when I was more out there, where like college, I just wanted to have fun. Was I still young and probably dumb? Absolutely. But freshman year, I just was like focused on me, and that's when I discovered therapy. But when I first got to college, it was really tough for me, because I didn't realize that although I was on this nice, bright, shiny new campus, all of my trauma and my baggage was still with me in my mind, like living with me, moved in on campus with me. It was quieter, and so I could hear my trauma even more. I was so used to chaos in my life that I never had to face my trauma head on. It just gave me a chance to be like, that was not normal. That was not okay. Like when I went to college, I felt the same feeling that I felt when I was in the gifted program. I felt like somebody's gonna tell me I don't belong here. Like they're gonna email me and be like, hey, by the way, you're not supposed to be here. Your tuition's not covered. So I went and enrolled in therapy like the second week of college. I was not playing no games on that campus. I knew that there was resources on campus for me to talk to someone, and I took all the advantage of those resources that I could. I was just more able to focus on being young and like enjoying campus, and I felt a lot lighter after like therapy. Every Wednesday I was so happy. I would go to therapy, and afterwards I would go to class, and I was just like, I felt so free, and I felt like a weight had been lifted off of my shoulders, because I was finally voicing the things that I never put words to. They helped me to transition into this new chapter of my life that felt very unfamiliar. I was not used to peace. I finally felt like a kid again. I found my best friend. You know, we're still best friends to this day, and we just bonded so much. I had a lot of outlets, and I just felt very fortunate. This chapter, I would say I was thriving instead of surviving. This is when I started to see, okay, my life can be great. I can still have a great, rest of my life, even though the first 15 to 17 years were a little rocky and rough. I can still move forward. So, and then after that, life got pretty normal. I'm going to sum it up really quick for you guys. Now, as you can see, like I'm doing my YouTube channel. God called me back to YouTube because I started in 2020 and I actually stopped for a while because of college, and it was just a lot to balance. But I went to church one day, and the pastor, who's my youth pastor, and my mentor. He specifically said, if you have a YouTube, a this, a that, like he had a stand up and he was like, God wants a return on it. And it's not dead and it's not, finished. He wants something from it. And now to see almost at 600 subscribers, feeling so comfortable and confident in myself, I could definitely use a few more rounds of therapy. But I think I turned out all right. I think I'm okay. I'm just excited for where God is bringing me. But I wanted to give you guys a little look into where he's already brought me, because there's someone out there who may be in my chapter 1 or my chapter 2 or maybe in my chapter 3. If you just let go and let God, if you let him restore you, replenish you, give you back everything that you've lost, God will take you in and he will never let you go. Even when you run, he will continue to pursue you. It has been so long since I ran from God, and I remember vividly moments in my life where it felt like I was running and coming back. I'm at the altar again, I'm running in, I'm coming out, because I didn't trust him. I am fully at a place where I'm like, God, I'm just a vessel. Use me how you want. My life is yours. You do whatever you need. And that took a lot of work. It took me to unlearn everything I learned as a kid about God and relearn his love for me. And so if you're on that like unlearning, relearning journey, there's plenty of videos on my channel about learning the love of God and kind of getting out of the church politics and just learning who he is. So I would definitely encourage you, definitely check those out. Thank you guys for hanging in there with me. I mean, I'm glad that we made it to the end. I feel encouraged that there's someone who needs just that little bit of encouragement that God can use anyone from anywhere who struggled with lust, struggled with being sexually assaulted, with depression, with grief. Like, God can use you no matter what you've been through. So yeah, thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you leave a comment, make sure you like this video. And until next time, keep it real.